Hey, good afternoon, or should I say good morning, depending on where you are in the world today. Happy Monday. Hey, Alan, thanks for joining. Thanks for taking the time. How was your weekend?
It was actually amazing. A long story, but I'm now officially a paid sound engineer.
Really?
Yeah, total
Interesting.
accident, and I'm a complete amateur. But hey, I got paid, so we're good now.
How did that work?
But it wasn't terrible.
No,
I definitely
interesting.
make more doing this though.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. So what is a sound engineer? Did you like have to bring speakers and microphones and
Well, I upgraded from roadie, so I no longer have to just lift them and load them for my wife's band. But they were short a sound guy due to illness, and so I
ah,
got to set up the soundboard, get it set up for the show, and tweak it during the performance.
nice. That's awesome. That's awesome. So for some of us, it was Easter weekend. I love my wife. She's amazing. Despite our children being both 28 and 30 years old, she still puts together Easter baskets for them. And did a so I filled all the little eggs and I hid them all over the yard and we did a little Easter egg hunt. So do you guys celebrate Easter and have any sort of family traditions around that or
I am very non-traditional, but we did wind up at a good friend of ours' house yesterday. It was a bad weather here, a nice cozy warm fire inside, and shared a great meal. And we had all gone to Mexico together for my wedding, and we were sharing pictures and stories. It was a great time yesterday.
nice, it's always good. So yeah, at least for us, we're pretty big on family traditions. My wife always puts something together for all of the little holidays around the year, whether it's Easter baskets or even Valentine's baskets, all the little things along the way. And so 4th of July, we really luck out because my birthday is on the 5th. So we get like big fireworks and cake. And so they kind of roll those two things. So I kind of get double for my birthday, but
Nice.
yeah, it's always fun. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of pull up your slides here in a second. Why don't you take a second to introduce yourself? Um, Tell us a little bit about who you are, that kind of stuff.
Sure. I was certainly raised not to talk about yourself.
Hmm.
I had to get past that, but I would like to present to you today building a documentation-based culture. And I do think it's important to know, okay, this guy's talking. Why should I listen?
Hmm.
So I try to give that basic background for you to decide if you should or not. I do run a forum called IT Documentation Users Group. It's a great conversation there, Tim. You've been a big part of helping people and asking questions in that group as well, and I appreciate that. I've been in IT since '94. I swear it's not that I'm that old. I started young. I've owned an MSP as well. Was able to sell it, doubled two others in leadership. Founded this company, Eureka Process, which specializes in process for IT firms, and wrote a book about the topic. Uh, so uh, that's my background and where I'm coming from giving this information.
You just go ahead and drop that link right in there for here. Boom. There's the book. Yes, and I got the audio version. Probably gonna have to buy the printed copy too because they work really well. I'm such an auditory learner that the Audible book was really great for me. But then have the physical copy to back that up. I do that a lot during when I buy books. But the link is right there for you in the chat, and it'll be posted in the show notes after as well. But it's been a really great book, and that's kind of what led me down this road was being a process oriented person myself. This book was right up my alley, right? And what you're doing is literally right up my alley. And so I thought, what a great way for the two of us to kind of come together and kind of talk a little bit about, well, the other P word, right? So yeah, it's I'm really looking forward to kind of digging in here. For those that don't know me, I'm Tim Golden. I'm the CTO at Vital Tech, an MSP located in New Hampshire, and I also run a compliance company under Compliance Risk. You can find us both at vitaltechservices.com and compliancerisk.io. So yeah, Alan, you want to just kind of jump into your slide? Let me go ahead and add that up here. And what is this? Leaky
Ah,
Bucket Syndrome.
yeah, it's dreaded. First of all, I would love to give just a disclaimer. I hate slides, guys. If you want to interrupt with comments and questions and derail the conversation, that's great for me. I'd rather talk about what you're interested in. But I do have some slides to get the party started. Uh, first off, when I was trying to develop the concept of the book, I was like, well, what problem are we solving? Why is process so important, and how do we define
Interrupted comments and questions.
And it was just this morning that I was like, all problems are people problems. And we, as people, are all affected by this terrible illness called LBS, Leaky Bucket Syndrome. And yes, it sounds like IBS for good reason. So what is LBS? I have a fun graphic to show you. So when we tend to, for example, onboard new teammates, new employees, we pass on our knowledge to them. And in the process of passing on knowledge, we didn't tell them everything, right? Because there's a lot of steps and things to remember. And they also interpret things differently than we give them. And as time progresses, they also develop different habits, some good, some bad, some ambivalent, whatever the case is. But the fact is their knowledge is leaking out of their bucket. And that's just a human ailment. And what begins to happen, and this is the problem, is, okay, well, that person's helping you train the next person. And that bucket, as it's passed from person to person, continues to leak until the poor guy in the red shirt, he's not really happy with his process. And the fact is, he's not the only one dissatisfied. So are you. So is the rest of the team. So this is the problem we have to solve. Now, the basics of the solution to make little red shirt guy here happy, it's easier said than done, right? But we can't patch the bucket. It can't be done. We're human beings. We're not robots. So we're always going to have a leaky bucket. So let's start adding to the bucket. And we add to the bucket with processes, our onboarding process, a coaching system, and KPIs. Now we can talk about any of those four that you like. I do have some strong information, though, on processes and coaching today. Ready to go for it.
Awesome. Yeah, the leaky bucket syndrome, right? As I started to look at this, and it kind of struck me a little bit like, oh, it makes sense, right? You can't, like, you plug one hole and another one, you plug another hole. You just can't, like, by the time you're playing catch up the whole time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your bucket's never getting full, right? You're never really like gaining that, like, Jack and Jill up the hill, right? So you're never really kind of gaining that whole thing where now our bucket is full, we're operationally efficient because we're always chasing our tail, right? We're always looking to put our finger in the dike or block that stuff up. So, hey, I see Tim Schnur just popped in. Hey, Tim, thanks for joining us. Feel free to kind of bounce some questions, some ideas, or some Dorito banter as far as I'm seeing over there in the chat. So thanks so much, Tim, for joining us. So Alan, where do we go from here? You mentioned a couple of different categories, a couple of different things.
Yeah, you know what? Let me check off a few boxes real quick.
Okay.
The easy ones to at least discuss conceptually. I'm going to talk to you about processes today. That's what I do. And team member onboarding, just to check that box, that is really a process in and of itself, maybe even a project template. That is a lot of reviewing your processes and process structure. So that's the solution. Easier said than done. That's what it is. Also, just precursory for KPIs, key performance indicators. And in fact, we use that term so often these days, we lose its meaning. And so sometimes I just like to change it up and say key indicators of performance. Just to change your minds, there's a huge difference in just metrics and the key ones. But the fact is if we agree on a measurement and we understand how it's measured, and we put that in front of everybody to see, it's a type of constant, oh, I know my expectations. I can see how I'm doing compared to my expectations. So that's a second form of just filling water into the bucket. What we're going to deep dive in a little bit more right now is process. It's in my company name. It's what I do. I'll tell you a short, sad story. I recently took a disc profile from a friend of mine, and he analyzed it for me. And he says, oh, according to this is surprising, Alan, you are terrible at processes.
That's kind of funny because I too just did a whole disc assessment, like, trying to understand both, from the vendor side, but trying to understand, like, what are my strong suits and like what are the things that I need to be able to work on and build upon, right? So strong C with a little bit of I, right? And so, but then when I get into the work environment, seeing that stuff shift, I wonder if we probably use the same person if I had to guess. But disc assessments are always fascinating to me because you think one thing, and like you just said, you're not process or what do you mean I'm not process oriented? Like I just literally wrote the book on it, right?
Well, I think my explanation is like many folks that are maybe listening now, I was a business owner and I found that the solution was process. I didn't like it, but it got me results. And just like training this poor monkey here, right? I push the button. If I push the right button, I get a treat. If I push the wrong button, I get electrocuted. And so process was that button that gave me treats. It was why early on in my business, I took a month off and it was okay. I was like, okay, man, process is the key. So I value process. I find it difficult, but I know it's important, so I work on it. And I get help where I need to. So that was my lesson from that profile.
Yeah, it's interesting because, in some areas of our business as an MSP, we're really good at process, right? We're like hands down, like, oh, I know the steps I need to do to fix a computer or deal with the printer or plug in a thing or like control alt delete. Like some of the areas of our business, we're really good at the process. In fact, the process is what usually saves us. And you know what? We're usually Googling to find the process, right?
Or Chat GPT these days.
For Chat GPT. Exactly. So, but then in other areas of our business, we tend to lax a lot. And, the other areas of our business, as you said, key performance indicators, right, are equally important, right?
They are. Hey, what's another revolutionary concept that dawned on me way later than it should have was that KPIs measure adherence to process.
Really?
That's really all they measure.
So only what gets measured can get done, right? Like that's something I say a lot.
Well, so here's an example, very common in our industry: SLA resolution time. How long does it take to resolve the ticket? You're measuring the not the age of the ticket, but the client experience of how long they were waiting on you. You can't, and you measure that because your system is set up where your statuses might invoke different SLA rules to measure those timers. And if your techs don't follow a consistent process to set the right statuses, that number is meaningless. Ergo, KPIs measure adherence to process.
I see. Yeah, interesting. Hey, quick shout out. Hey, Matt, how are you? Was just listening to you a little while ago there with Ray over on OIT. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
All right. So
go ahead. No, go ahead. You want me to bring your slide back up?
Yeah, I'm going to define. This is one of the few times I'll read from the slides. Okay. I got 3 definitions, and I found when I was writing the book that I had to define this for myself to understand what the heck I was talking about. Okay, so first off, process, and this is pretty much out of the dictionary, a series of actions that lead to a particular result. In the business world, we could even add the word positive result, right? So a series of actions that lead to a positive result. What I found, and the reason I did this homework on defining them, is I kept using the word process and documentation interchangeably, and I was trying to justify why is that okay? Because I was sure it was okay. And so I had to give my own definition of the word documentation, which is simply a written form in an accessible place of the decisions you have made. So if you decide to do a process in a particular way, we have to write that down in an accessible place, and that's documentation. Therefore, if I say the word process, it's documented. If I say documentation, that also can include the process and some other stuff as well. But that's a definition I wanted to clarify on how I use it. And also, we're talking a little bit about culture change today. So what is culture? And I had to look this up as well to get clear on it. So I've removed a few words to make it fit for us. It's a widely accepted way of doing something of a particular group of people. And this particular group is your team, your company, right? And the widely accepted way are going to be the processes that you decided on in documentation. So those definitions are key.
So you mentioned something in your I'm gonna do a little shameless plug here. Mention something in your documentation definition, right? So I'm just gonna pull this up here real quick, right? One of the things that you mentioned was having a place to do this stuff, right? Just so happens that Polygon can be one of those places. Albeit you can use SharePoint, you can use OneDrive, you can use all the various things that are out there, but I'm gonna make a shameless plug and say, hey, Polygon is one place where you can safely create these documents, share these documents, role-based, all that fun stuff. I'm just going to go back over here so I'm not stealing the whole limelight. But yeah, so.
And I actually have one more place for you to say that plug again. You're going to see that in a second then.
Okay.
So I think this part's pretty rote at this point, but I know we love details, like how the heck do we do this? How do we get started? Starting is the easy part, by the way, but I'll share it with you anyways. The first step that I do is meta knowledge, right? The process. And I know that name sounds silly and ridiculous, but I assure you, it's far better than procedure, which I started with back in 2006, and spell check still hates it to this day. You've repeated this word. Are you sure? So you should really write down your decisions on how you're going to structure your documentation and processes. So write the process first. As I recall from elementary school, the 5 W's and an H are the 6 interrogatives: the who, what, when, where, why, how.
Mm-hmm.
And picking where, for example, this is actually an easy question to answer. When you're talking about compliance and security, perhaps the answer is Polygon. We have chosen to store those types of documents here. That's the where of your documentation blueprint. Maybe you've decided to store all client quotes in SharePoint, but all SOPs in Hoodoo or IT Glue or IT Boost. Any answer is acceptable, but you have to write it down in an accessible place and communicate it to all. And you're going to see why that's important at the end of this.
Interesting. Yeah, one of the things that got me right in the very beginning of your book was the whole concept of a process, right? And it's like ATM card, right? It's like that whole PIN number. Like, no, wait, it's like, it seems redundant, seems funny when you're like PIN number, like, wait, what? So, but conceptually here, like in what you're saying, like, you need to have a process of your process, right? And it made total sense as I was reading through the book or listening through the book. And I was like, yeah, like, what is our documentation process? What is our onboarding, offboarding, insert thing here? But to have a standardized structure, starting with your process. Here is the structure that we are going to work off of when we're doing this work.
Exactly. Right? This becomes the blueprint of your documentation and process system. Just like in a blueprint for a house, that allows a dozen contractors to go do their little parts and still build toward the whole. You have to do the same thing for your documentation system. We're going to have a lot of hands in it. We need to know what the big plan is.
Right. And so you obtain that efficiencies by everybody being on the same page, following the same thing, right? And so you've probably heard me say this analogy a dozen times in the past, right? So how did Southwest get to be so big so fast?
Is that still true?
It isn't now. They first started out. How did they get to be so big so fast? Because they had one plane, one standardized set of documentation, pilot stuff, mechanical stuff, loading, unloading stuff. Everything was the same. So every human in their organization knew exactly where to go, what to do, and how to do it, because it was standardized. They gained such operational efficiencies in the very beginning that it allowed them to grow so rapidly, and then influx cash flow, build out more planes, and all that fun stuff.
I actually have another presentation on the 6 leadership superpowers. And 2 of those superpowers are simplify and structure. And those things, I think, help Southwest tremendously.
Yeah.
All right. So let's I'm going to help you with a couple of details on the rest of how to answer these questions to keep it simple. Like, what do I mean? Somebody needs to be accountable for your documentation system. I like to call them the documentation czar because the letter Z or Z is way too underused. So why not? Czar is fun. Call them king, queen, HPIC, it's all good. But have someone determine if it's a role or a name, preferably a role, who's doing it. And remember, the documentation czar doesn't have to do all the work. Really, they're more like a general contractor. They're looking at the blueprint going, okay, does this work meet the blueprint? What else needs to be done to match the blueprint? And they cause it to happen because they're accountable to it, but they don't have to do the work themselves. That's another easy one. Some of these questions get a little harder.
Okay.
When? Just a baby step harder. I love the idea, and I always have, that everyone should be responsible for documentation as far as, adding to it, editing it, making it better when they follow it. However, I have learned that as a business rolls up and grows up into these different maturity levels, and I have a very tree-based theme in how I treat businesses. I love the organic theme, so that's why you see seedling, sapling, and the leaves there.
See it.
Based on where you are at, I think that needs to change. I say start with one of two concepts, which is at the smaller levels, everyone can edit SOPs and processes and documentation live, to ultimately having a change management process for everything. Like, hey, I think there needs to be a change here. Somebody approves it, gets it updated. And most tools these days have a pretty good revision history, rollback, backups when we allow everyone access. But I've definitely seen some middle ground as well as you grow up, such as, hey, company policies, SOPs, those are going to move to a change management process while everybody can edit technical SOPs for a while. So just make a judgment call on where you're at, make the decision and write it down.
And that's a lot of what we do in our MSP, right? So there's kind of two streams of consciousness that we have in our MSP around documentation, right? There's like the technical implementation or a SOP or a standard operating procedure, a way we do things versus a policy that governs the why we do things, right? So we separate the why from the how, right? And we allow our technicians to modify the how because they're the ones in the trenches doing the work, and they're the ones, as we scale, as we grow, as we add more people. It's fine when it's just Tim running his shop by himself because all the stuff's in my brain, but as I onboarded new humans under our MSP, I needed to take that stuff and put it in their brain, right? And so, it was hard at first to get going, but now, like literally, there's something that's right there, it's big sticky, and it says, if I have to do it more than twice, document it, right?
That reminds me of two tangents.
Okay.
One, the why. The why is exactly as I just explained. LBS exists, it fixes it, and why the process is because this is the blueprint, and I would write that in your process. This document is important because.
Exactly. So we actually started with, I hate to use the word template, but it resonates with people. We actually have two different templates. One of them is our policy template, our governing template that says the why. It's got change management. It's got a specific header, specific fonts, specific things in the header and the footer and the title page. And it is structured to say every time we write a policy, we start with this blank thing and we use that as the structure. We also have a separate one for SOPs, right? So that now we are following some prescribed method that's, again, repeatable and efficient.
And you're going to see this how and why, so that's a good segue to there. One of the other tangents is, when should I start documenting?
Yesterday.
At all. And as Tim said, if I have to do it more than twice is a good example. But I will also tell you, if you're a one-person shop, documentation has a limited ROI. Treat it as such. I still feel like even when it was just me here, I wrote down my invoicing SOP because frankly, if I didn't, I would get it done still, but I would have to remember which screen, which order of operations again. So I wrote down 8 bullet points to remind me to do it the first time. But the more people you add, the more ROI you have on documenting your process. And I kind of have this loose number of 5. If I'm at 5 or plan to be at 5, I'm documenting everything.
Yeah.
Under that, it's some subset of that are the most important documents, the things that I repeat.
Yeah, you do make a good point, right? So when it was just me a zillion, trillion years ago and whatever, like I wasn't as good as documenting stuff as I should have been, because as I added people, I needed to do that knowledge transfer. So the minute I knew I needed to add a human was the minute I started even just a few bullets, right? It doesn't have to be hundreds of pages, right?
So better.
Right, simple is good, right? So, even if I looked at I don't know, pick the sales process, for example, like lead comes in, book a meeting, talk to the client, close a deal. Okay, we know there's way more steps into a whole sales process for an MSP, but 4 simple bullets that I can then hand off to our salesperson that we hired to be like, here's where we started. Flush it out, right?
You're also solving blank page syndrome. It is really hard to sit down and create something from nothing. But
fortunately, in the days of Google and ChatGPT and all the AI things, like you can pretty much get at any sort of starter thing pretty much anywhere off the internet these days.
Well, keep in mind, sometimes you don't even know what process you're writing yet.
True. Yeah.
So what do you Google? And so getting past that and getting a document created with 3 or 4 bullet points, or this is a superpower that I have, getting it just wrong enough where somebody wants to correct it, that's a win.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And I've overcome one page that way.
I've been known to do that many a times. And fortunately, we work together so well as a team that I can hand off to my level 2 or level 3 tech and be like, yeah, here's how I used to do it, like back on Windows Millennium Edition. But yeah, you go figure it out.
Windows me.
And then they would obviously correct me, and I'd be like, "Oh, thanks."
Nice. All right, so I have a very sloppy slide for you. It's a lot of words. I apologize. I tried to cover everything, but Tim, you mentioned templates.
Let's do this. All right.
You mentioned templates, and basically what this says is here's an overall template about how we write SOPs, processes, policies. There's a little bit of a section on naming. For example, if I'm writing out how to use, let's say, ConnectWise Manage, for example, or something with ConnectWise Manage, our requirement according to this is use the long name of the product, ConnectWise Manage, and use the short form, CWM, because our team's going to search for that. Correct. It's always keeping that searchability in mind. And even down there with the leaves, we have, okay, if you're in Word, have a standardized form for how this is filled out. Tim, you mentioned templates. Templates are also a great one. Some documentation systems have built-in templates. Use those, because the more consistent your documentation is, the easier it is to read it. Because this is another important tip. SOPs, for example, are not training documents. 2 separate pieces, because if you write a training document that's 8 pages on how to work a ticket, very useful, by the way. I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm not going to expect somebody to be held accountable for minor changes I make to an 8-page training document when they're working tickets every day. I'd rather have just the specific points about how we use the system, what our process is, with the assumption that training has already happened or internalized.
Right. That's a good point. So, some of this is just common sense, but telling us and then telling us again and then showing us and then showing us again, like for us, right, as a ConnectWise Manage user, in the very beginning of a document where I might be talking about CWM, I will say ConnectWise Manage in parens, the acronym, and then from that point forward, only use the acronym.
Right. And I get some samples to show you too, which will be fun. But I also add parens at the end of almost any document or password in searchability, and I allow anybody to type anything in there. Because if you think you might search for it, add it at the end. It's not going to hurt us. Text. The pixels are free, right?
True. Depending on like how your index and how your searching tools work, but yes.
Right. So this next part's a little complicated, but as Tim mentioned, there could be a difference in how you write a policy, how you write an SOP, how you write and store a template in your documentation system. So actually, Tim, I need to work with you, and we'll give anybody who attended today an opportunity to just download our process template so you can see some more details.
Sure.
This particular screen is not in that template. I actually developed it since I released that template. And the template says, hey, if you're writing technical SOPs, consider your audience, like your technician should know stuff. Don't make a training document when it's a technical SOP. If you're writing it for a client, do include screenshots, those types of things. But what we changed internally and we've loved is we've started pre-pending all of our document names of one of those words to let us know what this means and what it's for. It's been very useful because we have some training documents and we reference them sometimes. A lot of people like to ask, what's really the difference in a KB and an SOP? And in my own business, an example we have is for our RV screening service for recruiting and hiring. We have an SOP, do this and then that to accomplish this task. But I also have a knowledge base, which is, by the way, this is how our sales system works on our webpage. I don't know if you can use this information, but I needed to document how all that works so I could understand it, troubleshoot, make edits, but it wasn't a step-by-step guide. So define those things. We can anticipate these questions.
Yeah, and in our MSP, I'm just going to bump this up real quick here. We started to do some of this, right? So we started to do like how to spot a phishing email, like, and actually give screenshots to, and this is available on our documentation website that we offer for our clients, like how to get support, right? How to do stuff, right? And we publish this, because there's no real proprietary information, but it's that knowledge base that you were talking about, right? Disclaimers, how to create a group in Office 365 with screenshots. And so we have a standardized way of how do we do these things? Who is the intended audience and where do we go? Defined in our process.
Nice. I was writing down your URL. Sorry.
Oh, it's vitaltechservices.fyi. Yeah,
it's templates.
Yeah, it's vitaltechservices.fyi because it's for your information, right?
So short of questions, and keep them coming, guys. I'm going to cover the stuff you're probably going to find the most interesting. I'm going to cover it the fastest and count on questions for that.
Hey, Chris, thanks for joining. Feel free to pop in some questions, and we're here to fireside. Feel free to put us on the spot.
Yeah, thanks for joining, Chris. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples of some other metadata we can create outside the process or with the process. Simply your device naming standards. I think you should define that very early in your process journey. How do we name devices? I love coming up.
I have a good question. Let's noodle that for a second, right? So how do you name devices? I know how I do them. How do you name them?
I added some details there.
Oh, look at that.
I believe in having a client naming standard, like how do we make abbreviations? Realizing there are exceptions, and guess how I handle exceptions to the rule? I document them.
Oh my gosh, you document.
Whoa. I just created this device naming list. I created my own device numbering rules, which is essentially 3 digits for plentiful devices and 2 digits for less plentiful devices like servers. And I made device location optional because everybody has a main location. Why not observe the shortcuts when you can? So go ahead.
I was just saying, I'm gonna pull this full screen here real quick and take a little peek, right? So yada yada. Okay, good. So I wanna pause here for a little bit and talk about device naming, right? Because I put my cybersecurity hat on here for a minute, right? Versus my MSP hat on for a minute, right? So there's the school of thought, and I bet Chris might even chime in here, right? Naming a server FS1, which generally means file server, right? Or DHCP1, DHCP2, or DNS1, DNS2, right? So there's some school of thought on be careful what you name stuff, because then it, in the event of breach, in the event of hack, in the event of blah, it would be very easy for a bad actor to be like, those are all file servers, those are all domain controllers, those are all DHCP, oh look, web server, right? So there's one school of thought on be careful what you name stuff.
This is the old analogy that I used to give around security, and I still give this when talking about security. There was a day when you just walked into your hut with your kill and you had groceries on the table. And now we come from the grocery store and we have to unlock our door and lock our car with our hands full to get inside the door. And we could have 18 locks to the door to make it harder to break into, but then it becomes harder to use as well. So yeah, we have to find that fine line. And keep in mind that device naming, you could translate that and say, hey, we're going to have a easy name for devices that we use, and maybe that translates to a randomized name on the network, or whatever the case is,
right,
as long as you document how that works. And I'll let you guys and Tim decide on which part ventures into too much work versus the benefit.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So I just needed to put my cybersecurity hat on and be like,
yeah.
When picking a naming convention, regardless of what path you choose, at least be able to document what the keys mean, right? I know for us, FS meant file server, right? AD meant Active Directory, right? And so we've now changed a lot of that because of putting on the cybersecurity part, like not making it easy for bad actors to figure out what's what, right? So, take that into consideration when you're naming your devices, of course. I'm going to pull this up real quick here. Chris,
I would actually like to answer that one just a little bit later.
All right. We'll get to that then a little bit later. So, back to your PowerPoint then.
I'm making Chris wait. Hope it's good. So this is the basics. Last little note, I'm not recommending that you adopt this policy and then change all your device names, especially servers, right? Things count on those names. Start a standard, start using it going forward. If an opportunity presents itself to fix something in the past, go for it. And it was a kind of a fun, patient journey. 2 years into this journey in my business, suddenly I'm looking in our RMM like, oh, look at all the devices. Nice and tidy. Oh, here's an old one. It's named the old way. So that was fun.
Yeah, there's a whole nother session for another webinar coming down the street, like governing devices, right? So this is like, I literally I'm in building this out right now in Polygon, right? So I'm going to digress for a second. Every risk management framework has some component of asset management, right? Hardware, software, whatever. And so one of the things that I've seen in the space is that nobody actually governs it well, right? So yes, all of our RMM tools will collect devices and we'll have lists of devices, but do you actually review them on a regular cadence and make sure that these are the right devices and that these are the right humans, right? So we're actually recognize that as a problem in the industry, and we're actually building a tool to manage that. I know I digress, but when you're doing these naming conventions and I create file server 01, file server 02, file server 03, and then I retire 01, do I go back and make it a new one, 01 or 04, right? And so, this stuff can get complex, but it doesn't have to. The point that I'm trying to make is make it work for you and write it down.
Exactly what I would say as well is make the decision, anticipate the problem, make the decision.
Yeah. Don't, analysis paralysis you hear, right? Don't
let perfection get in the way of progress.
Yeah, all those fun things.
Yeah. So password naming standard, very much the same concept. Many times you'll be naming a password for a device, which is why I put device naming standards first. See how they start to connect. You're starting to build this house on top of your process.
Hmm.
As I mentioned before, naming based on global searches is very helpful, and be consistent. I'm going to give you a peek into my passwords. I'm using IT Glue. I believe IT Glue can do the job. I believe Hoodoo does a great job. There's a lot of other great systems out there. But if I'm looking up a client's IT Glue password, I know my client initials from our naming standard. I know that we have the short form and long form of IT Glue. And in this case, I just typed ITG. These passwords popped up. There's a typo in one of those, by the way, but I spotted it right away because we have the standard. Anybody who works for us can add a password like this, create a password like that, and get it. They know how to name it. And now we're so consistent. Again, the typos show up like sore thumbs. We fixed them.
Mm-hmm.
We have time for this. Yeah. So
Sure.
well, one more little technique. Yeah, don't want to cover it now. I guess I do. We have our documentation platform. Send update notices to a Teams channel. This will work with Slack, shared mailbox as well.
Mm-hmm.
I ask everybody to mute that channel. I do not expect them to see all those notes. Once a week, we have a process meeting, and we review those changes together. And it's usually as simple as, oh, this document says so-and-so edited it. What do you have to report? And it might be minor corrections only. Don't worry about it. Or it may be, hey, we changed this and that. Please keep this in mind when you're going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we stay up to date. And typically, we get that meeting done in 15 to 30 minutes a week.
Yeah, and that, as you were talking earlier about as you grow in maturity in your MSP and the whole change management piece, right? So, I mean, at least start somewhere, right? So you sending it to Slack, sending it to Teams, like putting like a summary together so that once a week we have what we call L10 meetings, right? So stand-up meetings, right? So they're 15 minutes and they're twice a week, usually Mondays and Wednesdays. And during those L10 meetings, one of them is what's changed, who did it, and why. Right. And so this kind of process, or this kind of thing that you're talking about can, again, make you a little bit more efficient so that the right people or all the people know what's going on in the organization at a very high level.
Right. Very good. So I'm on the right page. The golden 10 thinks like me. This is scary. The world's going to be.
Well, it is. I mean, we've both, like you said, you've been in the space for a long time, as have I. Like, my goal has always been take the stuff in my brain, teach it to the next generation so that at some point I don't have to anymore.
Yay, it does work that way.
Yeah.
So I have slides at the end that are a must, and I have slides in the middle that are not a must. So I'm going to very, very quickly through client asset documentation.
Okay. I'll stop asking questions.
Just for this second, add some input, Tim. You're worth it. We have all sorts of client assets. Sometimes that asset is not even a physical piece of inventory, even a software piece of inventory. Maybe it's a piece of knowledge, like how do we set up new PCs for this client? That could be an asset as well. The bottom line is you want to document as little as necessary. Just take a screenshot of this, or I don't know if we're sharing this video later, Tim.
It's live. It'll be up there.
Cool. Here are some tips and tricks on how to get down to what is the least I can document. No one's going to look up 500 fields for a firewall asset documentation, right? And the fact is, depending on the circumstances, if you think about it, which ones do you really need that are beyond just saving a config file? With that in mind, since we document our decisions, if we decide to document a type of asset in a specific way, write that down too. Mm-hmm. And I know some of these systems have structured data, which kind of do this for you. This is an example from IT Glue, works very similar in Hoodoo. And I get asked, why write this down if the structured data kind of does it for you? And my purpose is, one, if you're midway through documentation and deciding to adopt this helps you know what has been decided now versus what were we just doing what we could before. And two, as people ask questions. Look at that required applications and optional applications. I had to go back and answer more detail than the structured data would allow what this means. And so this can serve as a great way to teach people how we document assets. So again, that's just the basics. Also document how you're going to do client assets and be detailed. Does that make sense, Tim?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Now for the meat and potatoes. Actually, this is, I don't know, is this the gravy? Here's the deal. Let me introduce this concept and show you how this works first. There are actually 3 layers of process. The stuff we talked about before, the process, client asset documentation, naming standards, that is a process still. But the ultimate process is core values. And no, we do not have time for that today, but I love the concept. I think we all roughly understand what core values are about. But if you think about it, in the absence of a written process, core values are the ultimate decider of what is proper behavior. So those are critical to your organization. I do usually introduce a piece of middleware called Ways to Succeed. It's usually about 10 points and examples of how we live up to core values. For example, if it's not on your PSA, it didn't happen. If it's not on your documentation platform, it doesn't exist. What it means to be a timely person or a prepared person and how that relates to core values. These are things that I found people tempted to write into their SOPs, but then they have to write it into SOP. So just middleware, 2 pages tops, explaining your core values and how we operate. And then we have our processes. Those are easy. So the crux of all this, I'm sure some of you listening have written processes before. And you might even think that you're still writing lots of processes, but what I hear time and time again is nobody is following them. Nobody's referencing them. So you've done most of the work, but we usually stop shy of the one thing that will drive culture, which is a coaching system. Essentially, it's managing to process. All right, Tim, hit me up. If a process isn't managed, it doesn't exist. Effectively true. And so many of even my clients that work with this for a while, they have this great process library. They've shown everybody, they've trained them, and they're like, yeah, so-and-so is just not following the process. And I was like, well, when they didn't follow the process, what happened? And the answer is usually I reminded them. I told them. So there's only 2 ways to need coaching. Okay, coaching is kind of like an infraction, an incident, a lapse in judgment, whatever, right? And the only 2 ways are a failure to follow core values or a failure to follow process.
Interesting.
So if they did something that matches your core values and you didn't have a process for it, it's not an issue. It is an opportunity to work together to develop the process. Plain and simple. We just turned a negative into a positive.
Love it. Love it. Love it.
Now, we do have this full coaching system, and I'll just thumb through this real quick. We have to constantly pull people back to the process. So yes, we can do a reminder like, hey, we have this documented process. Here it is. Don't forget to follow this process. We're human beings, right? Leaky bucket. We got to do some reminders and such. And then we can work through retraining before we get into the more severe stuff like verbal warnings, written warnings, and ultimately deciding what is the final solution to this.
Right.
I have a slide that I actually hid, but I do have an 80-10-10 rule when I take on a new client. When we introduce culture process and we start this, 80% of people hop right on board and things are great. 10% of the people are a little, what's.
Right.
And depending on how we handle, if we do this with those 10%, there's a 10% in the middle that could go either way. So, on average, about 10% of the time, somebody doesn't work out when you're first introducing this. And it's because we've been holding on to people because we thought their labor was worthwhile. And
we talk a lot about, like, in the HR space, like the accountability piece, right? So, what this helps with is that, somewhat of an accountability piece, right? So I cannot expect my technicians or anybody in my organization to know, and I cannot expect them to be held accountable for a thing that they're unaware of, right? And so that's where this coaching piece comes in very important. Like, my expectation is blah, and then go do blah. And if they don't do blah, then reiterate, how can I help you understand that expectation? How can I guide you through that expectation? And having those checkpoints along the way, right? So I cannot say to my technicians, like, you're fired because you didn't set somebody's password right. No, he didn't know the standard. So I needed to train them on the standard. I needed to give them the expectation and then help them successfully achieve that time and time and time again.
Yeah. Our coaching system started off as 10 ways not to get fired.
Yeah, there you go.
Then it became 10 ways to succeed, and then some other iterations before we hit to ways to succeed, which is was far better than the 10 Commandments even. Yeah, so it is important to remember, when I use the word termination or can't make it, that is never the goal, right? That is the absolute last thing. But the fact is, if you've arrived at that point, you have to act. Otherwise, you are failing to create a culture,
right,
of a process-based company, and you have to do it.
And all too often, I'm all for remediation. I'm all for mitigation, right? But at some point, like, if you continue to smack your face against the wall on the 1,000th time, at some point you're going to realize that kind of hurts.
Yeah.
And have to make that decision, right? And so, that's not fun. It's not, but having a process in place to help people be successful, to know what their expectations are, and then to guide them along the way. Like that's what this is all about. It's not just about, do you have an onboarding? No, we want to be able to build that culture internally so that everybody has something to go off of, some expectation that we know we all want to meet and adhere to, and some goal to get to.
And by having it in writing, you have less room for interpretation on what those things are.
Exactly.
And when you act on these problems, you'll be amazed how quickly that culture turns around.
Yep.
And I'm talking about the threat of firing, but to show we are serious. Like when I take my team and I go, hey, what happened here? He's like, oh, I forgot we had that process. I can deal with that a couple of times, right? Oh, let me show you the process. Let's go over it together. And after 2 or 3 even different types of issues, right? And he realizes that every time I come back to, let me show you the process. Let's go through it together. Maybe we even edit it while we're in there. Suddenly, after 3 or 4 of those, he's looking there first.
Right. Muscle memory.
And my culture has been achieved. As a matter of fact, sometimes I've been corrected now. Hey, Alan, it says here that this has actually just happened. During onboarding, I forgot to check a box, which was in our process. And then when I sent out our NPS surveys, my list wouldn't import right because I didn't have the check box checked. I was like, oh no, now I have 3 hours of work because I didn't follow the process. And guess what? I posted it in our teams that this is what happened. This is the process, and this is aimed at me.
Right. We always say eat our own dog food, right? Hold ourselves accountable, right?
Yeah.
You use the word act. That happens to be our core values: accountability, care, and trust. Act.
Ooh.
Oh, look, the book. I'm going to dump that link in chat one more time over here.
And the very next slide, it has the links that I want to talk to Chris about.
Yes, Chris. Hopefully you're still there, Chris. Let's pull this up.
So you mentioned IT, Doug, and Eureka. We do have a lot of resources out there. We have our website. Please come visit. You may contact me directly. Info's on the screen or in the book. There's also a free community on Facebook under IT Doug, and Tim's quite active in there. I'm in there about a couple times a week. It's IT Documentation Users Group. Again, to me, documentation equals process. So if you ever just want to pop in there, myself and one of our fellow moderators will let you in there. Please answer the questions. That's an optional email address, and it does ask you why you're here, so we know that you're legit. That's a great place just to ask questions. I'll respond. Tim might respond, and we can help each other as a community. Fun polls sometimes. So Chris, what's in IT, Doug, is mainly just past questions and answers Some are specific, some are more general, some are surveys. There is a YouTube channel if you look for IT Doug or Eureka Process that has a lot of our past webinars. We used to do monthly webinars. Haven't done it this year. And I've heard from others that there's great content that answers questions, and I will frequently answer questions in IT Doug if we did it in a webinar. And then for theeurekacommunity.com, that is a paid-for website that I host. I love to compare it to the Tech Tribe, but they have a far superior, more developed community than we do. What we do have well is tons of our templates, almost 200 now that are there and available for you to just download. So there are processes in there, the naming standards are there. I have it in Word format so you can just download them as well. And we also have a community conference call once a month that you'll see inside, and you can just join and ask all of our consultants questions for an hour. It's like really inexpensive consulting.
Can I make a little plug as well? So people always talk about templates and about this and about that, and so I'm just going to kind of do this real quick. So as a Polygon subscriber within our policy platform and policy governance platform, right out of the gate, we provide a bunch of free, I hate the term template, but it's what the industry knows, right? We offer some starter things for you, for your MSP. Our real goal here is to help bring that kind of governing piece. So while we're not a template platform, we're a governing platform, but we also recognize that a lot of MSPs, like Chris, for example, are looking for these things as jumping off points, right? And so we have a bunch of these that we've developed over the years, right? A bunch of these for you to be able to use within your MSP. And we're adding more along the way, right? So yeah, it's to go along with what Alan has on their side. Yeah. We have some as well. More on the policy and procedure as opposed to organizational wide stuff.
So I was earlier, I was concerned, Tim, that you got the audiobook. Cause like, I don't know how I feel about being in your ear for an hour that close to you.
I've recognized, and I know we're kind of winding down here. Let me just check real quick. Yes, Chris, thank you so much. Polygos with the Chris and I believe I signed up for some preview early access. Yes, Chris, I believe we might have an onboarding going. If not, I will email you after and we can kind of get that going. So,
nice.
Alan, what I did want to say is I didn't think of this sooner, but it's literally been sitting here. Like we could have been like matching buddies with the yellow. Yours has got the Eureka light bulb, but like I'm SpongeBob square tie. Matching. Now, funny story about that tie is I wore that on my wedding day. That was my tie for our wedding day.
Nice. Just before we started this, Tim's like, hey, get the StreamYard going. Go in and grab coffee. Be right back. And in my head, I was like, I'm doing a costume change.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, I should have worn my yellow tie. We could have been matching, buddies.
Next time we'll coordinate.
Exactly.
Or have our wives coordinate for us.
This has been really great. I would imagine there's probably a few more we could probably do of these based on some of the questions that we're getting. This will reside on both LinkedIn, on our Facebook group, our own Facebook group, which is Compliance for MSPs. I can dump that link in the chat as well. And excuse me, it'll live on our LinkedIn page as well. So compliancerisk.io/Facebook/YouTube/LinkedIn all the slashes, right? So easy way for you to find us on all the socials. Do the like, share, fun things, right? We'll make sure Alan's links are in the chat as well. Alan, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been really great. We've got 30 seconds left. Any parting words?
No, just thank you, Tim. I really appreciate Chris, Tim, and Matt participating in the comments as well. Yeah. Feel free to reach out for questions, either in public forums, even in Tim's places. I'm glad to respond. I love helping, sharing, because I also need help sometimes. Please connect.
Yeah, absolutely. Sharing is caring. So thank you, everybody. Tim Golden, compliancerisk.io. Have a good rest of your week.